Welcome to the Emerging Markets Enthusiast. I'm your host, Patrick Alex. On this show, you hear the stories of operators and investors in emerging ecosystems. We dive into the nitty-gritty of scaling business and investing, showcasing the tremendous potential business has to leapfrog development. This is Pat from the Emerging Markets Enthusiast. You're in for a treat. I had the unique opportunity to sit down with Nuruddin Tayebi, founder and CEO of Yassir, a North African on-demand services platform that just closed a historic 150 million Series B round led by Bond with the participation of DN Capital, Dorsal Capital, Stanford Alumni Ventures, and Y Combinator. Having raised now more than 190 million in just 5 years, this turns Yassir into the most valuable startup in North Africa and one of the highest valued companies in Africa and the Middle East, especially in the current funding environment. This is just remarkable on what Noor and his team have achieved in such a short period of time in a market that is still not really paid much attention to by global venture capital. So it was just a unique opportunity to dive into his origin story, how after 15 years in the Valley, he returned to his native Algeria to start Yassir, now operate in 6 countries, in 45 cities, and servicing more than 8 million users, making it one of the most popular super apps in French-speaking Africa. This is just a unique story on how returnees, entrepreneurs from successful consolidated ecosystems return to their native country, make it big there, pay it forward, inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. And we go deep into his lessons learned on expanding beyond borders, fundraising, and scaling your business. It was just such a unique conversation with Nuruddin here, how he stays really so humble and down to earth. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did with Nuruddin Tayebi, founder and CEO of Yassir. And now, without further ado, directly onto the episode. And remember, you can follow the Emerging Markets Enthusiast wherever you're getting your podcast and check out our newsletter to stay up to date with the latest episodes. And if you enjoy the work we're doing, if you can drop us a review on wherever you're getting your podcast, that would be highly appreciated. Now, directly to the episode. Hi, Noor. It is such a pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Really great pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure is mine. And we're going to hear more about the recent fundraising round you just closed. Before that, I wanted to take a step back. How did you actually end up in the world of entrepreneurship and then subsequently became a founder?
Oh, man, long story. So personally, I'm from Algeria. So I was born and grew up there and then came to the US when I was 21 for grad school. So got my PhD from Stanford, which is kind of the heart of Silicon Valley. What everyone talks about in Silicon Valley or even at Stanford is entrepreneurship and more so high-tech entrepreneurship. But like my path was actually initially in big tech, where I got the chance to actually gain a lot of experience, whether that be on the engineering, but also on the product and the marketing side. And then decided to take the entrepreneurial path, pretty much jump off the cliff, where I got the chance, still in Silicon Valley, to found a company, build a team, raise funds, and take things to the next level. And honestly, like it was probably the most enjoyable, most educational, most stressful, most everything experience of my life that till today I absolutely love.
Fantastic. So much to talk about. And there's one specific aspect I wanted to double click on a bit more. We see that quite often on the show that you've got founders that went abroad for grad school or to get work experience, oftentimes in the States, one has to say so, right? And then they return to their home country. When did that moment arrive where you said, okay, I got to go back to my country and branch out and start a business there?
Everything happens in a very unexpected ways. So things are not planned. What happened is that just being from the region, I started getting involved in the nascent high-tech entrepreneurship scene there, but like in a very passive way, meaning that I would mentor teams. Sometimes I would even fund teams that I liked. It wasn't, like full involvement, but it was kind of, trying to give back to the region and help with whatever experience experience I had. But to be honest with you, very quickly, I came to realize that the biggest problem in the region when it came to high-tech entrepreneurship wasn't bureaucracy or lack of funding. And I'm mentioning these two because that's what always people brought up as being the biggest problems. And I'm not saying those weren't problems, but to me, the bigger problem was the entrepreneur, him or herself. And what I mean by that is that there was definitely a lack of mindset, best practices and values that would allow, say, like a team of entrepreneurs build something that can have, global impact. That made me conclude that if I was serious about doing anything, I should get involved myself. And of course, making that decision took a while because it's not an easy decision, given, the number of years that I spent in the US, married with kids. So it's not a decision that you do overnight, but really came to the conclusion that being involved would be the only way for me to at least attempt to have kind of like a success model that would be emulated by others. And to me, the best way to actually learn is by doing. My dream then, which still is my dream now, is that like every person that goes through Yassir would one day start his or her own company, and hopefully with the learnings that they had through their time with us, they could build something even bigger, and would be there to support them in any shape or form, and just like make an ecosystem thrive. So that was how it happened. So again, like mission driven, wanting to empower the talent there and create an impact.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about Yassir in just a second and the important multiplier effects you're generating there also amongst your employees. Before that, I'm curious because you were saying it was more of a mindset issue that startups were maybe not scaling in North Africa and Maghreb. Is that because they were not thinking big enough, or what was it really?
Honestly, multiple factors. Like definitely not being ambitious enough is one of them. Kind of, like knowing how to tackle things from a business perspective. I mean, like in high-tech entrepreneurship, most of the founders are usually, technical folks like engineers and things like that. And I must say, one of the drawbacks in the region, which is kind of, like borrowed from maybe like European mindset and more so like French mindset, but like from maybe like 20 years ago, where the educational system just pushes people to, get through your education, find a job in a big company. So that kind of like value of entrepreneurship and generating ideas is kind of like very limited. And that's what you see, especially with the technical folks that want to start companies. That's really made it like super hard, like for entrepreneurs or an entity, I think, to emerge from the region. So that's one. Two is just, like I always say that an entrepreneur is someone that defies the status quo. And I love Reid Hoffman's definition of what an entrepreneur is, which is someone that is going to jump off the cliff, and before he or she crashes, will have to build a plane and start flying. There was that mentality that if I don't have the red carpet, I'm not going to do anything, and I would give up, like at the first obstacle. And so that's super important. Like when you're an entrepreneur, you need to push the limits of what's possible. You have a hurdle, you need to find a solution. You have to go around it. You cannot say, oh, bureaucracy didn't let me do this, or, like, oh, lack of money, or you name it, whatever that obstacle is. And so that was really the main thing that was missing.
Makes total sense. And switching gears, talking a little bit more about Yassir. What problem is Yassir fixing, and what's kind of the vision you're building there for the company?
Yeah, on the surface, always people think of us as, like a platform that offers on-demand services, but that was never our business model. So when we first started, something that we noticed is that most people in the region were using cash. So really cash is king. Barely anyone uses cards or, digital payments. Actually, like many of the countries we currently operate in, like you don't even have that option. And so we looked at Africa in general, and not just North Africa. If you look at the GDP of Africa today is $3 trillion, even expected to be 10x by 2050. 72% actually of it is in the informal market and cash transaction. The number one reason why people use cash is not because of the lack of a banking system. Banking system is there. It's just that people don't trust the banking system. When we first started, like on-demand services in parts of Africa, mainly countries that we call like French-speaking Africa. And I'm including like the Maghreb region as part of it, not because of the language, but more so because of the legal system. On-demand services were pretty much in existence. And what we saw was that, like most people were spending their money in transportation and food. And so we were like, why don't we use on-demand services like ride hailing, food delivery, grocery delivery, you name it, that solve important and immediate needs. And of course, if we execute well, we could start having a very large user base that subconsciously trusts us. And so once you have that trust, then it becomes very easy to, provide payment services. And what's cool about the business model we offer is that on-demand services are multi-sided marketplaces. So you're not just targeting your consumers, you're targeting what we call the supply, who are the drivers and the couriers that are on your platform, the merchants that are on your platform, distributors, wholesalers, producers, you name it. So we're building through on-demand services a complete virtuous circle and a complete ecosystem in which payment services can thrive. And we got to a point now when we can offer those payment services. So this is really what Yassir is about, which actually means in Arabic easy. And the idea is to make people's life easy in all aspects of their lives.
It's truly important what you're saying there in terms of cash-based societies and that issue of trust. We see that so much in as a hurdle of digitization in emerging markets. And how did you specifically at Yassir overcome that hurdle? How did you create that trust among your early user base?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, on-demand services build that trust in a very subconscious way. And, like if your services are solving necessities and needs, that trust can actually be built very quickly. So say, for instance, if you take ride hailing, in the countries we operate in, you have like very big cities with very large population and with very high density. And public transportation is very archaic. So ride hailing solves, like a real problem, and it becomes a necessity. So adoption, or, like what we call product market fit, is there. So without actually having to make, like a lot of efforts, you get like that pre-high adoption. And because you have that adoption, and when you think about it, like the fact that you're using your phone to call a driver that you don't even know, subconsciously you're building trust. Same thing on the driver's side, the fact that you're actually going and picking up someone that you don't even know, subconsciously you're building that trust. And that's super duper important. Like when you're providing a service to a certain user base that already trusts you, and like they see that you're actually making a difference in their life, adding other products just becomes a lot easier. So when we switched from ride hailing, for instance, to food and grocery delivery, the adoption was very smooth. And now that we're getting into payments, and we did run some pilots, which have been very highly promising, we see that kind of, trust trickling, like from one vertical to another. And this is like from all the sides of the marketplace. To give you like an anecdote, not long ago, I was in Algiers and I was taking the Yassir for my transportation. And so I get in the car and the driver is a lady. She was in her, I would say like in her 50s, like very elegant. And so I was super curious. I asked her, like, why are you a driver in the platform? I didn't tell her who I was. And it turned out that she was actually a person that worked in one of the biggest companies in the country. She was doing this after work hours because her daughter was getting married very soon and she wanted to save up more money for her wedding. So when you create like that virtuous circle in which, like everyone actually has benefits from, that trust is like, as I said, subconsciously built, and you could do marvels once you have that. With the goal, of course, to make people's life even more easier, and hence the name Yassir, as I said.
It certainly makes a lot of sense to start with first ride hailing and then go into food and then into payments. So kind of the level of trust you need kind of increases maybe when you talk about person-to-person transaction, when we talk about payments.
Exactly. Yeah. Not just that trust, but like as you transition from one product to another, the spending also increases, which is also important for, as you offer payment services.
Of course, for your platform, certainly to create the margins and the LTV, certainly you need to offer different services. We see that with Rappi in Latam. And talking about the other benchmarks, kind of, when you started Yassir, was there any company who was saying, okay, I'm going to tropicalize some of those learnings? Did you think of Uber at all, or did you rather look into other emerging markets, Cream, or other businesses that were around where you're saying, okay, I'm going to kind of tropicalize it for the Maghreb market? Or?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that we didn't do any benchmarks on like existing products, which is super duper important, but we wanted to make sure that our product serves, the region we operate in. For you to be able to serve the region you operate in, you need to know who your customers are. What their habits are, what the culture is. And so we really made sure that, like all the products that we built were highly custom to to the region we operated in. And so even when some bigger competition came into the region, and you actually just did mention one of them, I'm not going to repeat the name, they came with their product, which was not fit to the region. They never were able to succeed. Whereas, us, I mean, with lesser means, like we're the market leader, and no one was able to overtake us.
Really, kudos to you what you've built there, and also in terms of the fundraising journey you had, right? Even the Series A was already massive milestone for the North African Francophone ecosystem in Africa, one could say. You started a company in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, and then you went through YC, and then you raised early stage capital. Tell us a little bit about your fundraising journey and how that was like raising for a business based in the Maghreb region, which is certainly not really it's almost a frontier market, probably one could say, in terms of VC investment, right?
I mean, honestly, like our fundraising experience wasn't easy, mainly because of the region. I mean, like it wasn't sexy enough. So what happened is that there were two things. We were executing well. So we had really good growth from pretty much, like day one since we launched. We wanted to, of course, like to keep up with that growth, raise funds. And there isn't any local capital that you can tap into. So you have to go global. Given, like my previous experience in Silicon Valley and the network that I had, it was kind of like the first thing to tap into. It's like, VC firms that I knew, people that I knew that could actually make that happen. But then like we were getting, like two kinds of responses. And these are like folks that like, like really knew me and had that, like very strong connection. And they were seeing, like the numbers of the business that were really good. And so we would have one group that would say, look, we like you, we like what you're doing, but like this is a region we're not familiar with, so we're not going to take the risk. And then you have a second group that would tell you, great, like you've done great, but we need to build conviction. So it's going to take us a while, like to get there and decide to whether fund the company or not. So it was always harder for us to actually get to that point of commitment. But on the other hand, because of that situation, we were always frugal in the way we executed. So we always looked at our unit economics, like how much we're spending, what's the cost of acquisition, how much subsidies we're giving, the LTV of our users, how many are we retaining, like all that stuff, which are the basis of a strong business. And so what we thought at the time was a curse turned out to be actually an advantage later on, especially in the macroeconomic situation that, like we're currently living in. And so one of the reasons we went through YC, of course, like beyond the fact that, like YC is a great place and a great network, is to kind of, like build further credibility and reputation. It comes, like YC companies. And through that, with what we've been executing, it was a lot easier for us to raise money, because that was that added kind of, like stamp of approval that YC brought. And really, I mean, like after that, it was really a question of executing well. Once that happened, I think we got to a size where we could no longer be ignored. And that was the point, like when the Series A came, we raised $30 million back in, I think it was like last August or September. And then the more recent one that I think is pretty big news, I think, for the whole North Africa, probably even, I would say, the MENA region in Africa.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about the Series B in just a second. But before that, when you're pitching Yassir and the Maghreb region, right? We see that founders have to educate investors on the opportunity, on the region. So could you maybe summarize what's the opportunity in Francophone Africa on the ground in a few simple words?
You definitely nailed it. Before I answer that question, like we got tons of rejections. I mean, I cannot count them. They're probably like in the hundreds. But to me, it was always worth doing that education because it was teaching people about the region. So even if you did get rejected, like I always found it was, like something positive. People don't really understand like the region and more so like emerging markets in general. One thing is in terms of purchase power. There are two factors actually associated with purchase power in the region. One is like purely cultural. And the second one is many of the emerging markets have like a very strong informal market. So I'll get to the first and then the second one. So in the first one, like say like a a continent like Africa, or even like you take like the Maghreb countries specifically, majority of the population is super young, like over 75% is under 35. The average family size is around 5.3. So it's pretty large compared to say like Europe, which is 2.1. And so you have like this very young population, and a lot of them actually are professional and single, and because of cultural reasons, still live with their parents. And so when you think about like the household income, it's not about, just like the salary of the parents. It's actually the parents and the kids. And so everyone contributes, and we do see it in, like our customer behavior, the way they order and the way they do things. And that's really important, like in terms of, like really weighing on the value of the market or the purchase power. The other one is the informal market, which is huge. Like, and people don't realize its power. Take a country like Algeria. Its GDP today is around $200 billion. There is about like $100 billion of informal market that is unaccounted for. And that is actually not even taxed because it's an informal market and hence the use of cash. And so if you look at like the formal statistics, you would think and say like you look at like the rate of unemployment, you'll be like, oh yeah, there's like a large unemployment rate. But like in reality, because of that informal market, you have all these folks that are working in the informal market that have like a pretty high purchase power, oftentimes actually as high, if not even higher than like some of the European countries like France, Spain, and others. And so really, educating people about this point becomes super important. But also, even like beyond that, I mean, like if you look at just like World Bank statistics on the region, take Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Algeria has the second largest GDP per capita in Africa, Tunisia the third, Morocco the fourth. And if you look at also like what's called the Gini coefficient, and that kind of, like tells you how strong of a middle and upper class you have, Algeria has a Gini coefficient of 28. If you take Europe, only Sweden has such a low number. And that is an indication of a very strong middle and upper class. And we see it like across the region, highly educated, very strong. And then with the cell phone penetration rates, I mean, it just like makes it ripe for disruption.
Absolutely. And we see that so often in terms of the demographics, young demographics, actually disposable income that people in industrialized or developed markets do not always see. They're just not conscious about the opportunity because they never look into it. Then certainly the 50% informality, which by building the right products, you can tap into that as well.
Exactly. Not only tap into it, but also bring it into the formal market.
Yeah, ideally, which the traditional businesses didn't achieve oftentimes, right? And you're missing half of the pie, and that's so important. In terms of then the Series B, right? So you closed the Series A last year, already quite sizable. You get the first institutional investors on board. And how was it then raising the Series B in this current environment, which is probably a bit more adverse again? How was that like? And how did then the round eventually come together? And how did you think about selecting the right investors for that stage?
All great questions. As I mentioned to you earlier, like we always had a hard time raising funds initially. And that pushed us to always be frugal, look at our unit economics and making sure that they were sound from day one. That was super duper important for us. And we continued with that kind of execution even when we raised funds, even post Series A. So we really focused on building a strong business that looked more at building a brand that would reduce our cost of acquisition, but at the same time, like getting the most out of our users in terms of both acquisition and retention. And so when the market like suddenly shifted and, there was that adverse environment toward growth companies, especially those that were growing at all costs, like forgetting their bottom line, like all of a sudden we were in the darling seats because not only were we showing growth, but we were showing, like very sound unit economics. And that's what everyone was actually looking for at the time. And we got to a size, as I mentioned earlier, where we could no longer be ignored, even, despite, like the, say, like unsexiness of the region we were operating in. And so I made it honestly a lot easier when we approached VC firms, and some of them actually did approach us directly. It was a lot easier process. And then like in terms of the choice of the partners, it's really like who we felt that was the best fit, and not just in terms of, like the valuation or the amount of money put. Best fit in terms of values, mission, but also what those investors could bring to the table beyond the capital.
It's so important what you're saying there, repetitively already, that you have to build a sustainable business model from the get-go, because you can't depend on that capital. Or when it comes in, you always get account for that maybe at one point in time it's not going to come in. So the hyper growth mode and burning capital at all costs oftentimes doesn't work in emerging ecosystems, because you can't just count on that, right? On that infinite pool of capital.
Exactly. Yeah. No, totally. But then, like you're actually going back to the basics, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like a business needs to make money. Of course, it shouldn't be, one needs to find a balance between growth and profitability. But yeah, if you can get the best of the two worlds with a better execution, I mean, that's the best business you can build.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe taking a step back and thinking a bit more about the ecosystem, right? Like, what do you think this round is going to do to the ecosystem and the signal effect it can have across its borders and inspire maybe other founders?
Yeah, I mean, we already, to be honest, see it. I mean, for instance, you're seeing like more startups emerging from the region, not necessarily, like folks that were related to Yassir, but use us kind of, like as a role model, saying, look, like we have already like a big champion coming from the region. I've had people actually telling me that they were using Yassir like in their pitch to kind of, introduce the region. Usually like those entities also like a lot of them come to us and we provide them with support on how to raise money, or, say like they want to get into IC or getting the right partnerships. And it's part of our mission. So we do all we can to actually help them with that. But beyond that, and this is something that was very surprising to me and makes me feel actually like more responsible and more stressed too, both within the company, but also outside the company. Within the company is that at the end of the day, I saw the dream. And that dream was, like the mission of empowering the local talent and proving that talent can do great things. And internally, when I see team members, for instance, like working so late, like 1, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., like preparing for the day after, the ambition they have, it's because, they believe in that dream that I saw. And so I feel that responsibility towards them that, okay, I saw the dream. Now people are believing in it. So I'd better make it work. Kind of, putting that responsibility on my shoulders. I would say maybe over the course of the last year or so, either I get like so many like texts and emails or, like connections through LinkedIn, or like random people I don't know, like, we're proud of you. You're our role model. Sometimes like it scares me when I'm actually walking on the street and like someone stops me and wants to take a selfie with me. To me, like it's a huge responsibility. And the fact that, like people are like looking up to what we built makes me happy and makes me feel that, like we're going in the right direction, and hopefully it can have, like much bigger impact in the region from the high-tech entrepreneurship ecosystems.
And it's so important having these early role models. And that's what we do at Endeavor. That's what we look for, as you know, and you're certainly among them. And why did you end up joining Endeavor as an entrepreneur? And kind of what did Endeavor bring to you and Yassir, and what does it mean to you to be part of that organization?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm from Silicon Valley. So all my adult and professional life pretty much was spent there. What people don't realize about Silicon Valley, I mean, people think always of Silicon Valley as brains and money. And so you bring them together, you create great things. But to be honest, brains and money are a byproduct of something a lot more important, which is like a value system in which people like help one another, paying it forward, being convinced that making one successful actually makes you successful. And that's something, like I kind of saw in my own eyes. I mean, like I initially mentioned to you that, like my first venture was in Silicon Valley, and that was like one of the best experiences I've had in my life. The amount of support I was getting was just tremendous. Folks that didn't know me at all, but because saw potential, did help me like in any shapes and forms, like raising funds, building strategy, you name it, without ever asking for anything in return. I was part of, I don't know if you know about this accelerator called like Stardex, which is dedicated to only Stanford alumni. And it's basically built that kind of ecosystem where not only can you take advantage of, but you also give back to. For instance, like within that one, I'm still, like a mentor, a judge, a neighborhood lead, like helping, like as much as I can. And I do it with so much joy and satisfaction. I think of Endeavor as what you see in Silicon Valley, but at the global level. It's an amazing network that is, as I said, pretty much global, that not only can you take advantage of, but you can also give so much back to. What a better way to actually make the whole world successful. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all humans. At the end of the day, like we should all have access to anything and everything. Being able to be part of a network that is that global with that mission, that's paralleled.
Fantastic to hear that, and also how you continue to contribute. When we then come back to the North African ecosystem, the Francophone Africa, at what stage do you see the ecosystem? What are some of the building blocks when you started Yassir? Maybe they came now into place, and what are we still missing?
We need to have things at scale. What I mean by that is that today you have like just a few outliers. We need to have a lot more. But I think it's coming. I mean, as I said, the multiplier effect is just going to happen anytime soon. And you see it like in other parts of Africa, say like Nigeria or Egypt. And just look at these, just like 5-6 years ago, not even, like 10 or 20 years ago. There is a certain barrier initially, but once you overcome it, it just floods. We haven't gone through that barrier yet, but I think we're getting close. And once we get that, I think it will be a thriving ecosystem in terms of the quality of the entrepreneurs, but also in terms of the capital that can flow in the region.
Absolutely. You have to hit that inflection point as an ecosystem, and it certainly needs a few stones kind of to create these waves, and that evidently you get this going kind of automatically almost, and you get that at scale.
Exactly. I have my theory on that. It's more philosophical. Like in physics, there's this principle which is called like the principle of equilibrium. It simply states that every entity in the universe is in equilibrium only when it attains like a minimum level of energy. And I truly believe that, like that principle applies to societies and companies. And what I mean by that is that, like a society or like a company that is in equilibrium is where actually with a small effort, you can create a huge impact, and vice versa. Like if it's not in equilibrium, it's the other way around. We need to get to a point where we create that equilibrium, wherein like with a small effort, we can create a huge impact.
It's so true what you're saying there, and really important even to get to different levels of equilibrium. You need to maybe create certain changes in the status quo to get that going. I think that there needs to be certain glitches or certain points in society or in history where you can say, okay, there's this big advancement, right, and maybe we go backwards then again, and then you jump again. It's not linear. That's what I'm saying. Getting a bit more concrete in terms of getting that scale in the Maghreb region and expanding across the region. Is it still, one could say, okay, it's Francophone Africa and it's English-speaking Africa. Is that still something that applies or less so nowadays?
Not at all. I think you're getting, like entrepreneurs that have that vision of going global. I would even say that even in terms of geography, it goes beyond continents now. There is no reason, like why an entity coming out of Africa or Asia or any other parts of the world, like attack a whole totally different region. We're seeing, like entrepreneurs that are not only ambitious, but also have the know-how, not only in terms of building teams, but also in terms of execution to make that happen.
Brilliant. Before we move into the fast speed round, for Yassir, what is next for the company? Anything you can share with the audience besides the funding round?
I mean, look, we're sharp focused on our growth, and growth is hard. It's really hard, I can tell you. It's not simple at all. When you talk about exponential growth, it's not just in terms of, like your revenues. It's like your team is growing exponentially. Complexity is at so many levels, like things that you might not even think about is like office space, computers, like everything has to, grow exponentially with what you have, and you have to anticipate for it. It's not like, oh okay, I have a problem now, I need to solve it. Like everything has to be done ahead of time. Growth is not easy. Sharp focus on execution. As I mentioned, our end game has been always payment. So now we got to a point where we can actually introduce that. There are two parts of it. We're looking, of course, at consolidating our growth in the existing markets. We're really still scratching the surface in the existing markets, but at the same time, look bigger, as I mentioned to you, and expand into other geos beyond the African continent, actually.
Fantastic. Certainly so much more to come for Yassir, and excited to hear more about it as you expand into probably kind of the fintech arm and having embedded finance, which is certainly big topic for startups and emerging markets. Before we wrap up, there's 3 questions I'm asking everyone on the podcast in the fast speed round. Would you be ready for those 3 questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, first one is, who's an entrepreneur you admire and why?
My mom, actually.
Amazing. Love it.
My mom is actually a doctor by background, so a medical doctor, but she had her practice. I always grew up seeing how she was engaged with her practice. Like what drove her wasn't monetary gain, but it was the passion of, helping others and creating an impact in the environment she had. Just, like growing up with that, it just like instills in you like so much without even actually thinking about it. And you don't realize that till you grow.
Absolutely. Love it. And second one then, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and would like to pass on to others?
Simplicity, like the simple things are the best. Never see complexity.
So true. Important, but simple piece of advice, but oftentimes not as simple as one might think. And last but not least, 3 keywords that make a successful business, in your opinion.
Ambition, trust, and focus.
Well, that's a wrap. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience before we close?
It was really great speaking with you. I hope that it wasn't just enjoyable for the 2 of us, but also hopefully for the folks that are going to listen to us. And would love to do this one more time, hopefully when we raise our Series C, which will be far much bigger than what we currently have.
Absolutely, counting on it. No, it's amazing to have you on the show as the first Maghreb, first Algerian entrepreneur. It was an honor. Really, so impressive what you've built there with Yassir. And thanks again for making the time, Noor. Thank you for listening to the Emerging Markets Enthusiast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast to always stay up to date with the latest episodes. This show is produced by me, Patrick Alex. Also a big shout out to fellow emerging markets enthusiast Constanze Ulreich, who is leading our newsletter efforts, and much more. Title music by Stock Studio called That Funk Show.